The message arrived on a Friday afternoon. The company board had decided to remove me from the acquisition project I had spent 18 months building from scratch. My name was being erased from all documents. The deal worth $100 million would move forward without me. They said I no longer fit the company culture. I had worked every weekend for a year and a half. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, family gatherings. I spent nights reviewing contracts while everyone else slept. I taught myself commercial property law just to understand every clause. But none of that mattered when Todd, the operations director, stood in front of the entire leadership team and said I was too soft to represent the firm in negotiations with international investors. The room went silent. 30 people watched as my career collapsed in real time. Nobody defended me. How does a company throw away the who built their biggest deal in I thought working harder than everyone else would be enough. I thought results would speak louder than gossip. But the comments started small. The way I dressed. The way I spoke. Then came the exclusions. The Friday drinks I never got invited to. The client dinners where my chair remained empty. Until the day they decided someone more masculine should close my deal. One detail. If you've ever felt judged just for being who you are, or know someone who has gone through that, the story will touch you. Want to follow it to the end. Subscribe and help give voice to stories that should no longer remain silent. My name is Cameron, and I work in commercial real estate acquisitions in Sydney. Or I used to work there before everything fell apart. I started at Henderson Property Group 6 years ago as a junior analyst. Back then, I was just grateful to have a job in the industry. The firm specialized in large-scale property acquisitions for international investment funds. Shopping centers, office towers, industrial warehouses. Big money, big pressure, bajegos. From day one, I knew I had to work twice as hard as everyone else. Not because I lacked talent, but because I could feel the eyes on me. The way conversations stopped when I entered the break room. The slight hesitation before someone shook my hand. I never announced I was gay. I just existed. And apparently, that was enough to make people uncomfortable. My manager, Derek, was decent at first. He gave me fair assignments and evaluated my work objectively. But I noticed he never invited me to the after-work drinks. Every Friday, the team would head to the pub across the street. I would hear them planning it, laughing about last week's stories, making plans for the night. And week after week, nobody asked if I wanted to come. I told myself it didn't matter. I was there to work, not to make friends. So I stayed late instead. I learned everything I could about property valuation, zoning laws, market analysis. I took online courses in finance. I studied development feasibility until I could calculate returns in my head. By my third year, I was the best analyst in the... Everyone knew it, even if nobody said it out loud. That's when I met Marcus. He worked in architecture at a firm 2 buildings down from ours. We crossed paths at a coffee shop one morning. He smiled at me. A real smile, not the tight, polite ones I got at the office. We started talking. He asked about my work. I asked about his projects. 3 weeks later, we went on our first proper date. Dinner at a small Italian place in Surrey Hills. We talked for 4 hours. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Marcus was everything I needed. Patient, kind, supportive. He understood the pressure I faced. He had his own battles with being openly gay in a conservative industry, but he handled it with grace. He never hid who he was. And slowly, he helped me realize I didn't have to hid either. Work continued. I got promoted to senior analyst, then to acquisition manager. With each promotion came more responsibility and more visibility. And with more visibility came more comments. Todd, the operations director, started making jokes about my voice during meetings. He would say things like, "That's a bit theatrical, mate. Let's keep it professional." Everyone would laugh nervously. I would smile and continue with my presentation. Sarah, one of the senior managers, would comment on my clothes. "You dress very well, Cameron." Very stylish. The emphasis on stylish always carried a tone, like it was a criticism disguised as a compliment. She never said those things to the other men who wore expensive suits. The worst part was the exclusions. Important client meetings where I mysteriously wasn't invited, even though I knew the project better than anyone. Strategy sessions that happened without me. Office celebrations where my invitation got lost. When I asked Derek about it, he would say things like, "Oh, we thought you were busy," or "It was a last-minute thing." But I kept working. I kept delivering results. I brought in 3 major acquisitions in 2 years. Properties worth over $400 million combined. The firm's revenue grew by 30% because of my deals. And still, I was never quite part of the inner circle. Then came the Singapore project. Henderson Property Group had been trying to break into the Asian market for years. We needed a landmark deal, something big enough to establish credibility. I spent 6 months researching opportunities. I analyzed hundreds of properties across Southeast Asia. And finally, I found it. A mixed-use development in Singapore. Prime location, strong tenants, room for value-add improvements. The seller was motivated. The price was right. It was perfect. I presented the opportunity to the board. I had prepared for weeks. Every number was exact. Every risk was identified and mitigated. Every assumption was backed by data. The presentation lasted 90 minutes. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Todd started clapping. Slowly, others joined. Derek smiled at me. For a moment, I thought maybe things were changing. The board approved the acquisition. We would need to raise capital, conduct due diligence, negotiate terms. It would take at least a year, maybe longer, and I would lead the entire process. It was the biggest opportunity of my career. I called Marcus that night. He could hear the excitement in my voice. He told me he was proud of me. We celebrated with wine on his balcony, watching the city lights. I had no idea what was coming. I had no idea that success would make everything worse. Because success meant visibility. And visibility meant people started paying closer attention to who I was. And some people really didn't like what they saw. The Singapore project consumed my life. I spent the next year building relationships with investors, negotiating with sellers, coordinating due diligence teams. I flew to Singapore 11 times in 8 months. I worked 16-hour days. I missed dinners with Marcus. I canceled weekend plans. I stopped going to the gym. My entire existence revolved around closing this deal. Marcus understood at first. He knew how important this was. But as months passed, I could see the frustration growing. We would plan a weekend away, and I would cancel because a meeting got scheduled. We would be having dinner, and I would be on my phone answering emails. He never complained directly, but I could feel the distance form. At work, the dynamic shifted. Todd started attending my meetings. He would sit in the back of the room, arms crossed, watching. He never contributed anything useful. He just watched. When I asked Derek why Todd was suddenly so interested in my project, Derek said the board wanted senior oversight on such a large deal. It made sense, but it felt wrong. Sarah started questioning my decisions. Why that valuation multiple? Why those lease assumptions? Why this financing structure? I would explain my reasoning. I would show the analysis. She would nod and say, "Okay, just making sure we have thought this through." But her tone suggested she didn't trust me. Then came the comments about the investors. The Singapore deal required bringing in an international investment fund as a partner. I had spent months building a relationship with a fund based in Hong Kong. The senior partner, David Chen, liked me approach. He trusted my analysis. We had several productive meetings. The partnership was taking shape. Todd pulled me aside after one investor call. He said David seemed unsure about some things. I asked what things. Todd said he couldn't put his finger on it, just a feeling. He suggested maybe we needed someone with more gravitas to manage the investor relationship. I asked what that meant. Todd said nothing directly. He just said the investors might prefer working with someone who projects more traditional authority. I knew what he meant. He meant someone who looked and sounded different than me. Someone masculine. Someone straight. Someone who fit their idea of what a powerful executive should be. I ignored it. I kept working. The deal was progressing. We were getting close to signing the partnership agreement. The valuation was set at $190 million. Henderson would acquire 60%. The Hong Kong fund would take 40%. My commission on this deal alone would be over $300,000. More importantly, it would establish me as one of the top acquisition professionals in Australia. But the exclusions intensified. The leadership team started having weekly strategy dinners. They never invited me. I would hear about theme afterward. Derek would mention something that was discussed. I would ask why I wasn't there. He would say it was just a casual thing, nothing formal. But they happened every week, and I was never included. One Friday, the entire office went to happy hour. 80 people gathered at the pub across the street. I only found out because I walked past and saw them through the window. All my colleagues, laughing, drinking, celebrating. I stood outside for a moment watching. Nobody noticed me. I walked home alone. I told Marcus about it that night. He was angry. He said I should confront them. I said it wouldn't change anything. He asked why I accepted being treated like that. I didn't have a good answer. The truth was, I thought if I just closed the deal, everything would be fine. I thought success would force them to respect me. The investor meetings moved to Sydney. David Chen flew in with his team. We had 3 days of intensive negotiations. Everything was going perfectly. The terms were agreed. The financing was secured. We were days away from signing. On the second night, Henderson organized a formal dinner for the investors. Expensive restaurant in Circular Quay. Ocean views. Private room. I assumed I would be there. I had managed the entire relationship. But when I asked Derek about the time, he looked uncomfortable. He said Todd thought it would be better if the senior leadership handled this dinner. He said I should focus on finalizing the documentation. I stood there, stunned. This was my deal. I had built every aspect of it. And they were excluding me from the closing dinner. I asked Derek directly, is this because of who I am? Derek looked away. He said it was a business decision. He said Todd felt the investors would be more comfortable with a certain type of representation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk out. But I swallowed it. I went back to my desk. I worked through the night, preparing documents while they ate expensive food, and took credit for my work. The next morning, David Chen asked where I was at the dinner. Todd told him I was dealing with urgent documentation issues. David looked confused. He said he had hoped to thank me personally for all the work. Todd smoothly redirected the conversation. That's when I knew. They were going to push me out. They were going to take my deal and erase me from it. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. The final contract signing was scheduled for a Friday. 10 months of work coming together. I arrived at the office early, wearing my best suit. I had prepared a short speech thanking everyone involved. I imagined Derek acknowledging my contribution in front of the board. I imagined finally being accepted. At 9 in the morning, Derek called me into his office. Todd was there. So was Jennifer, the human resources director. My stomach dropped. Nobody schedules an HR meeting on signing day unless something is very wrong. Derek did most of the talking. He said the firm was restructuring the acquisitions team. He said my role was being eliminated. He said they were grateful for my contributions, but they needed to move in a different direction. The words sounded rehearsed. Artificial. I asked about the Singapore deal. Todd leaned forward. He said TheProject would continue without interruption. He said they had already assigned it to Ryan, one of the other managers. He said Ryan would represent the firm at the signing. I couldn't breathe. Ryan had joined the company. He knew nothing about this deal. He hadn't attended a single investor meeting. He hadn't reviewed the contracts. He didn't understand the market. His only qualification was being straight, married, and conventionally masculine. I asked why. Derek looked at the floor. Todd spoke. He said the investors preferred working with someone who embodied the firm's traditional values. He said international clients expected a certain profile. He said it was nothing personal. Nothing personal. They were firing me because I was gay. They were stealing my deal because I made them uncomfortable. And they were pretending it was a business decision. I asked what would happen to my commission. Jennifer said my employment agreement entitled me to commission only on completed deals. Since I would no longer be employed at completion, I would receive nothing. 10 months of work. Weekends sacrificed. Relationship damaged. All for nothing. I stood up. I looked at Todd. I asked him to say it. Say the real reason. He stared back at me. He said I should be grateful they were offering a severance package. 3 months' pay. In exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. They wanted to silence me. They wanted me to disappear quietly while they celebrated my work. I walked out without signing anything. I went to my desk. I packed my things while everyone watched. 30 people saw me carrying a box through the office. Nobody asked what happened. They knew. I drove to Marcus's apartment. It was 11 in the morning. He was working from home. When he opened the door and saw my face, he knew. He held me while I cried. For the first time in 6 years, I let myself break down. For 3 days, I barely moved. I stayed in Marcus's apartment, trying to process what happened. He took time off work to be with me. He brought me food. He listened while I talked through everything. He reminded me that their bigotry didn't define my worth. On Monday morning, I woke up angry. Not sad. Not defeated. Angry. They had underestimated me. They thought I was soft. They thought I would disappear. They had no idea what I was capable of. I started making calls. I reached out to David Chen. I explained what happened. He was shocked. He said he had no idea Henderson planned to remove me. He said he specifically wanted to work with me because of my expertise and integrity. He said he felt misled. I asked David a question. If I could structure a similar deal with better terms through a different vehicle, would he be interested? He was silent for a moment. Then he said yes. He said his fund valued relationships over company names. He said if I could deliver the same opportunity with improved economics, he would consider it. I spent 2 weeks working around the clock. I contacted the Singapore sellers directly. I explained the situation. They remembered me from my site visits. They had appreciated my thorough due diligence. They were frustrated that Henderson kept requesting deadline extensions. I told them I could close faster with simpler approval processes. I structured a new deal. Instead of using a big firm, I would acquire the property through a special purpose vehicle. David's fund would still provide 60% of capital, but I would control 40%. Not as an employee, as a principal, as an owner. The numbers worked better than the Henderson structure. Lower FEs, faster closing, more flexible terms. The sellers agreed. David's fund approved. In 3 weeks, I had reconstructed the entire deal outside of Henderson Property Group, but didn't tell them. I let them continue preparing for their signing. I let Ryan stumble through meetings he didn't understand. I let Todd believe he had won. And I waited. Henderson's signing was scheduled for a Wednesday in March. They had arranged a big celebration. Press release prepared. Champagne ordered. The board would attend. Major clients were invited. It was meant to be their triumphant moment. On Tuesday afternoon, the sellers sent Henderson a formal notice. Theodore was terminated. No explanation. Just a simple statement that they had accepted another offer. Todd called me in. He was furious. He demanded to know if I had sabotaged them. I said nothing. I just listened to him panic. Within hours, the news spread through Sydney's property market. Henderson Property Group had lost their landmark Asian deal. Their biggest acquisition in 5 years had collapsed at the finish line. Their reputation took an immediate hit. Investors started questioning their competence. On Thursday, I held my own signing. Small office. No press. Just me, David Chen, the sellers, and our lawyers. We completed the acquisition of the Singapore property for $185 million. $5 million less than Henderson's agreed price. Better terms, cleaner structure, faster execution. I owned 40% of a property worth $185 million. My equity stake was worth $74 million on paper. More importantly, I had proven I didn't need Henderson. I didn't need their platform or their name. I had the skills, relationships, and knowledge to compete directly against them. But I wasn't done. The Singapore deal was just the beginning. I started calling other developers and investors I had worked with over the years. I explained what happened. Many were disgusted by Henderson's discrimination. Several offered to work with me directly. Within 2 months, I had commitments for 3 more acquisitions. Projects Henderson had been pursuing for years. Derek called me 6 weeks after my signing. He wanted to meet for coffee. I agreed out of curiosity. We met at the same cafe where I first talked to Marcus years ago. Derek looked exhausted. He said the firm was struggling. They had lost 4 major deals. Their stock price had dropped 18%. The board was demanding answers. He asked if I would consider coming back. He said they made a mistake. He said Todd had been forced to resign after investors complained about the mismanagement of the Singapore deal. He said they wanted to make things right. I looked at him. This man had watched them destroy my career. He had sat silently while Todd humiliated me. He had participated in my exclusion for years. And now he wanted me to save them. I told Derek I wasn't interested in employment, but I made him an offer. I had learned that Henderson was vulnerable. Their largest shareholder, a pension fund, was unhappy with recent performance. They controlled 32% of voting shares. I had been quietly buying Henderson stock through various accounts for 6 weeks, small purchases that didn't trigger disclosure requirements. I now own 8%. I told Derek I would be calling for a special shareholder meeting. I would be proposing major changes to the board composition. I had already spoken with the pension fund. They were receptive to new leadership. Together, we controlled 40%. We needed just 11 more percent to force changes. Derek's face went pale. He realized what I was doing. I wasn't trying to get my job back. I was taking over the company that had fired me. The shareholder meeting happened in July. I presented a detailed analysis of Henderson's declining performance. I highlighted the missed opportunities. I showed how discriminatory practices had driven away talent and deals. I proposed replacing 4 board members, including the chairman who had supported Todd. The vote was close, but I won. 53% in favor. The board was restructured. New leadership was appointed. People who valued merit over prejudice. People who understood that diversity strengthened business rather than weakened it. I didn't take an executive role. I remained a significant shareholder and strategic advisor. I continued building my own acquisition platform. But I had achieved something more important than revenge. I had proven that talent and integrity could defeat bigotry and corruption. Henderson's stock recovered over the next year. Under new leadership, they started winning deals again. They implemented proper diversity policies. They created an inclusive culture. Ironically, they became more successful after I forced them to change than they ever were when they fired me. Todd tried to find work at other firms, but the story had spread. Everyone in Sydney's property industry knew what he had done. Nobody would hire him. Last I heard, he was working in retail management. A dramatic fall for someone who thought he was untouchable. Ryan, the manager who replaced me, quietly left the industry. He knew he was out of his depth. He knew everyone saw him as a token beneficiary of discrimination. He moved to Brisbane and started a small business unrelated to real estate. Marcus and I are still together, stronger than ever. He stood by me during the darkest period. He reminded me of my worth when I had forgotten it. We bought a house in Bondi. We host dinner parties. We live openly and proudly. And sometimes, late at night, he asks if I have any regrets. I tell him no, every battle made me stronger. Every setback revealed who truly mattered. Looking back, I understand now that prejudice was never about my qualifications or performance. It was about their fear. Their discomfort with anything that challenged their narrow view of what success would look like. They wanted to keep me small because my existence threatened their assumptions. But they made a critical mistake. They assumed that excluding me would make me disappear. Instead, it freed me to build something they could never control. I learned that you don't defeat prejudice by seeking approval from those who discriminate. You defeat it by succeeding so completely that they become irrelevant. My identity was never my weakness. It was always my strength. It gave me perspective they lacked. It taught me resilience they never developed. And ultimately, it drove me to achieve more than I ever would have if they had simply accepted me. The best revenge isn't anger. It's building a life so authentic and successful that their rejection becomes meaningless. If my story inspired you, if you've ever felt diminished or know someone who has, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, we share real stories of overcoming and resistance. And if you have your own story of triumph against prejudice, share it in the comments. Your experience can inspire someone going through a similar situation. Remember, your value is not defined by others' prejudice. Your talent is greater than any barrier they try to put in your way. And sometimes the best revenge is simply being who you are, without apologizing. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story, which will be even more impactful.